Welcome to my channel, a place that brings interesting and dramatic stories. Hope you have a fun experience. Please listen to the next story. I didn't walk in on my now ex-wife in the act of cheating, but I was convinced it was happening. I used some software that captures keystrokes on her computer to get her password for an email account she didn't think I knew about. When she went to the store one day, I logged into her email account and read the messages she'd been exchanging with the guy. I did this for months. Months went by, and I was completely oblivious to the situation until about the last 2 weeks. Everything started spinning, both figuratively and literally. I was overwhelmed with anger while at the same time desperately trying to deny that this was actually happening. It's that sinking, helpless feeling when you're trying to hold on to the idea that this can't be real. But reality keeps slapping you with the truth, saying, "Oh, it's real. And it's going to get a lot more painful than this." Thank goodness for my sister. I called her, even though she lives 2 time zones away, and she helped me regain my composure. She was incredibly sympathetic, but she also provided the rational voice I desperately needed because I had lost all sense of rationality. I had genuinely considered doing something terrible when my ex-wife got home. I was done. I've never even thrown a punch in anger. Don't own a tool. I'm not a bad person, but I had snapped, and things were on the verge of turning ugly. However, it didn't come to that. When my ex-wife returned from the store, I met her in the garage and stopped her from getting out of the car. I told her I would bring the groceries inside, but she had to leave immediately. She was very confused. So I said, "I know everything. Everything. You need to go and you need to leave right now." She simply denied. She told me I was crazy and so on. I managed to channel my sister and stayed overwhelmingly calm while also being quite stern. I made it clear that lying to me wouldn't help her. She needed to understand that she had been caught. She needed to get away from me as quickly as possible. And she should stay away until I decide it's okay for her to come back. Things took a turn for the worst before they started improving. I was a wreck for quite some time. In the following weeks, I actually tried to forgive her. I allowed her to move back in, persuaded her that we needed counseling, and even experienced a hospital stay after collapsing at work due to a combination of stress and lack of sleep. This incident frightened her and made the situation very real. She requested my forgiveness, although she never said she was sorry, and claimed she was ending things with the other guy, committing to saving our marriage. A week later, that suspicious feeling crept back in. She was in the shower, and I still had the key logging software on her computer. She had no clue how I discovered her, but she had changed the password to that email account. I logged into her email once again, and I found out she had been with the guy the day before. I lost it. But this time, my anger wasn't directed at her. It was aimed at him. Had his home address from an earlier email where he gave her directions to his house for a rendezvous after work. I punched his address into my phone and drove to his house. By some stroke of luck, he wasn't home. I wasn't armed and had no clear plan. Just an intention to confront him physically until either he was incapacitated, or the police intervened, but he wasn't there. His mother was, as this 41-year-old guy, I was 33 and my ex-wife was 29, still lived with his parents. His mom appeared to be a sweet elderly lady, so when he wasn't there, she asked if she could pass on a message. I replied, "Sure. Tell him Dave stopped by. I'm sure he'll be pleased to hear that." I then drove to a friend's house nearby. He contacted several other friends to gather there with me because I was obviously in a pretty messed up state. Fortunately, I have wonderful friends and family who prevented anything bad from happening and made sure I didn't do anything to ruin my life. Meanwhile, my ex-wife was frantically calling my phone, attempting to locate me. I suppose she eventually pieced together that I had figured everything out, probably because I hadn't even bothered to log out of her email on her computer. She and I continued to have eye closeness, probably even more frequently than before, for a few months. Even after we had initiated divorce proceedings, and she had moved out. That was probably the most messed up aspect of it all. Even after everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to stop engaging with her for quite a while. It felt surreal to engage in casual encounters with a woman I was technically still married to. Me with a simple busy? All that meant was she wanted me. As for the guy she cheated with, I came across pictures of him. He was one of the most physically unimpressive individuals I've ever seen. Old, overweight, bald, and just looked like a spineless loser. But apparently, he adored her. And that's what she wanted. My guess is he was utterly inadequate in bed, but satisfied her emotional needs. So she was finding emotional fulfillment with him while seeking physical gratification from me. This messed with my head even more. Most guys, myself included, might leap at the chance to have closeness. But when it's someone you love to betray you like that, it's emotionally devastating. Eventually, I came to realize this and decided to cut her out of my life. The last words I ever spoke to her were on the day of our divorce, in the courtroom. So it's on the record. Lose my number. I never want to hear from you again. I kept the house and I kept the dog. So in a way, I came out ahead. About 6 or 7 months later, she texted me around 9 p.m. on a Friday. Her message simply said, "How are you these days?" I chose not to respond. I sat there contemplating how long it must have taken her to muster the courage to do that. She probably had the urge to text me for days at that point and finally worked up the courage to send that message. I hope the anticipation of a response tormented her, but she didn't receive the satisfaction of one. All of this transpired between September 2017 and August 2018. Which now feels like a distant past life. Since then, I've spent a significant amount of time on my own focusing on self-discovery. I've made substantial positive changes in my life, learning how to take care of myself, which in turn has made me better in relationships. Both personally and professionally, I've achieved significant milestones. Presently, I'm in a relationship with a woman I wholeheartedly love. We've been together since June 2020. And although we plan to marry at some point, neither of us is rushing into it. In fact, we're going on a cruise together next week. I haven't had any contact with my ex since 2018. I couldn't care less about her. I've completely moved on. However, I must admit that I can't forgive her. And part of me still wishes for unfortunate things to happen to her. She intentionally hurt me as deeply as anyone possibly could have. What makes it worse is that she never offered a single apology, not even once. She continued to lie and deny her actions even after I confronted her with quotes from her own emails. She lied to our friends and my family, claiming that I had fabricated everything about another guy. Most of the time, I took the high road, despite having every email as evidence of her betrayal. I thought about revealing these emails to others, but never actually did it. On a few occasions, I even threatened to send printed copies of her explicit conversations to her religious grandmother, but ultimately refrained. There are times when I wish I had gone through with it. I'm not entirely sure, but the fact that I still wish ill upon her might indicate that I haven't completely moved on. I'm past her, but not past the hurt she caused. It's frustrating that she never faced any consequences for her actions. At the very least, I never had the satisfaction of seeing her suffer while she had full control over my suffering. I'm aware she's married now, to the guy she cheated on me with, and they still live with his parents in a smaller, less impressive house compared to where I live with my dog and wonderful girlfriend. I also know she's been switching jobs frequently for the past 4 years. This knowledge comes from one of my closest friends, who also happens to be her cousin and coworker. Occasionally, he inadvertently reveals some information about her when discussing his family. They don't see her much anymore because they've come to realize what a terrible person she truly is. However, there are times when I'm driving home from work after a rough day. And as I pass the exit to her current residence, I secretly hope there's a car accident in the area. I wish it would involve her, or honestly, even more so, him. That would inflict more pain on her. I guess I might be a more vindictive person than I give myself credit for. Alright, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. Story 2. I'm a 28-year-old guy and I discovered that my 28-year-old wife had an affair with her ex-boss, a 35-year-old married man with kids. We've been married for 5 years, and we've been together since high school. In fact, we were even childhood neighbors. She's always been a constant presence in my life. We both came from broken families, and we thought we were creating something different from what we grew up with. At least that's what I believed. Maybe I was just incredibly naive all along. I still work remotely while my wife has gone back to working in person. There aren't many women in her field, and she often complained to me about her job feeling like a boys' club. Her affair partner, who was also her supervisor at the time, was supposed to be one of the good ones and looked out for her at work. Recently, my wife got a promotion, and I was genuinely happy for her. She became a supervisor herself, which came with more responsibilities, including a few business trips throughout the year. Her first trip was last week from Wednesday to Friday. Before she left, I told her I'd be cheering her on from home, and she told me to take care of her heart because she always says that whenever we have to be apart. On Monday, she came home from work early, and I immediately sensed that something was wrong. She looked distressed, and there was a red mark on her right cheek. My wife is fair-skinned and bruises easily. I asked her what had happened, but she only wanted a hug and said she needed to feel my embrace. After hugging for a while, she finally admitted that something terrible had occurred at work. She sat me down on the couch and confessed to something that has shattered me and turned my life upside down. She had closeness with her former supervisor during the business trip. At first, I couldn't even process it. It felt like I was witnessing it happening to someone else, or that she was about to reveal it was all a cruel joke. I think I would have preferred the cruel joke over this harsh reality. Throughout her confession, I remained completely silent, not uttering a single word. I was just in a state of shock. Cheating has always been a sensitive topic for me, as it is for many people. My own family was torn apart by an affair my dad had. I was the one who discovered his infidelity and had to inform my mom. My relationship with my dad has never been the same since, as he blames me for ruining the family and has never forgiven me. My wife knew how deeply cheating affected me, as she had seen me cry over it when we were teenagers. And she had comforted me. And now she's done this to me? To us? To make matters worse, it turns out the man-wife found out about the affair and confronted her husband and my wife at their workplace. It turned into a big scene with employees and customers as witnesses. The woman called my wife white trash and even slapped her. After the slap, other employees stepped in, and the woman was eventually escorted out of the building. My wife then called her older sister, 30F, who scolded her and insisted she needed to confess the affair to me, emphasizing that I deserved to hear it from her. Still, I remained silent and she pleaded with me to say something. In that moment, all I could manage to say was that I needed her to explain what had happened during the trip. She recounted that on the second day of the trip, she went out for drinks with the other team leads. As the night went on, the other team leads gradually left until only she and her former supervisor remained, and they ended up going back to his room to listen to music. He kept showering her with compliments, telling her how attractive she was, and suggesting that if he were in my shoes, he wouldn't be able to resist her. He eventually kissed her. According to my wife, she felt overwhelmed and claimed she wasn't thinking clearly. However, she allowed him to continue kissing her, which escalated to him groping her, and ultimately they became intimate. I couldn't bear to hear more details, so I abruptly got up from the couch and told her to stop. She extended her hand toward me, but I moved away, instructing her not to touch me. She broke down in tears, offering profuse apologies and pleading for forgiveness. She kept emphasizing that it was the gravest mistake she had ever made, expressing self-loathing and wishing she could undo it. She repeatedly professed her love for me, insisting that she loved only me and that alcohol had clouded her judgment. I informed her that she needed to leave immediately, urging her to call her sister to come pick her up. She got up from the couch, crying even harder, and attempted to hug me, but I distanced myself once again. She begged me not to take this course of action, making promises like quitting her job, granting me unrestricted access to her phone, and proposing that we undergo counseling. I couldn't hold myself together. I told her that if she wasn't going to leave the house, then I would. I didn't even pause to pack a bag or anything, I simply headed for the door. She grabbed my arm, seemingly trying to prevent me from leaving, and continued to plead with me, emphasizing that after everything we'd been through, this couldn't be the end of us. Update. Yesterday, I decided to reach out to the other betrayed spouse. I felt it was crucial to hear her perspective to gain clarity, as she wouldn't have any reason to deceive me or hold back information. I located her Facebook account and messaged her on Messenger. She responded in less than 10 minutes and offered a video call right away. I promptly confirmed my availability. With just one glance and no words exchanged, it was evident that she was going through a similar ordeal as me. She mentioned that shortly after being escorted out of the workplace last Monday, she actually attempted to get in touch with me, but couldn't find my contact information. In fact, one of the last things she told my wife was a threat to inform me about the affair. As she recounted this, all I could think about was how my wife hurried home that day and how her sister insisted that I needed to hear about the affair from her. I inquired if she knew more about what happened during the team lead trip, or if it was indeed just a one-night stand. I also asked how she found out about it. What she shared with me confirmed my worst fears. That indicated an intense emotional affair. OBS shared all this with me through screen sharing, and I could hardly keep my composure. She explained that back in January, she noticed her husband becoming distant and disinterested in their relationship. There were instances when she saw him texting my wife, but he dismissed it as work-related conversations. The day before the trip, she visited the workplace to drop something off that her significant other had forgotten. She found my wife in his office standing closely together, joking, and smiling. The atmosphere between them seemed flirtatious. When they noticed her, they quickly separated, and my wife appeared panicked while her husband attempted to act nonchalant. It was at that moment that OBS became certain something was going on between her and my wife, but she chose not to confront it, wanting undeniable proof that her husband couldn't deny. After the trip, her significant other became even more distant and dismissive. That night, she waited until he had fallen asleep and then checked his phone. She went to his text conversation with my wife, where everything was laid bare. Explicit texts exchanged before the trip. It began as emotional infidelity, with some messages from the other man stating that he couldn't concentrate at work whenever my wife was around. In these texts, it was clear that the other man was the one pursuing my wife, but it didn't make much of a difference because she never rejected his advances. Some of the texts before the trip had the other man blaming his wife and venting about repeated miscarriages. It was truly disgusting the way he spoke about her to my wife. He repeatedly mentioned how he might need a woman like my wife. There were texts from last Thursday night with the other man inviting my wife to join the team for drinks, and texts he sent her the following morning that strongly indicated they had closeness. At this point, my wife hadn't replied to him since Thursday night. I didn't think it was possible for me to feel any more pain, but here I am. The other betrayed spouse mentioned that it took all her strength to remain calm because she didn't want to wake her twins sleeping in the other room. She decided not to wake her husband or confront him right away. In her heart, she had already moved on from him, feeling that he had crossed a line that couldn't be crossed back. She confessed that she was angrier than she had ever been in their marriage, and she was determined to hurt him in the same way he had hurt her. So she put on a facade, pretended everything was normal, and waited until Monday to expose him at work in front of his colleagues, subordinates, and customers. She explained that this confrontation had been building up for a while. It happened by chance that my wife was at work that day too. When the other betrayed spouse saw my wife with the other man and another coworker, she decided to confront my wife as well. My wife attempted unsuccessfully to get her to calm down. The other betrayed spouse then mentioned that her husband had shown no signs of remorse, only anger at her public outburst. I learned from her that the other man was fired the day after the confrontation. She also kicked him out of their house, and she shared that one of the most challenging aspects was explaining all of this to her twins. I understood this. Having witnessed my own mother do the same after my father's actions, she said this entire ordeal had revealed her husband's true character. Despite her husband pursuing my wife, she believed my wife still played a role in the affair. And as a woman, she had no sympathy or respect for my wife. I reassured her that I didn't fault her for feeling that way. She had every right. Surprisingly, she even apologized to me for her husband's involvement in the affair. I was momentarily speechless and then apologized for my wife's part. She mentioned that we were now both members of a club we never wanted to join. A club our significant others had forced us into. She inquired about my wife and me, and I informed her that I wasn't currently living with my wife. We wished each other the best, exchanged numbers, and left the door open for future conversations. Part of me felt a sense of satisfaction that the other man was losing everything, his job and his family, and perhaps he was experiencing suffering as well. However, I wasn't proud of that feeling. Simultaneously, I felt immense anger toward my wife for what she had done to us, for breaking our vows, and for jeopardizing my health. We had love after she returned from the trip, and the post-trip texts suggested that protection may not have been used. I am aware that I need to re-establish contact with my wife to discuss the information provided by the other betrayed spouse and request a timeline. Update. Hello, everyone. Here's an update on the situation. I've been maintaining light contact with my wife. She texted me about her post-suspension meeting and an hour later informed me that she had been fired. She still appeared the same as on Sunday. She mentioned that she had completed the timeline, and I told her I would come over tomorrow. She expressed that writing the timeline was one of the most challenging tasks she has ever undertaken, second only to our current separation. My mom offered to accompany me for support, clarifying that she wouldn't enter the house, but would wait in the car. I believe she was concerned about my well-being during the drive back. I accepted her offer, and we drove to my wife's location. She was waiting for me inside with a 2-page document. She appeared anxious, and I sat beside her on the couch, reminiscent of day. I asked her to read the timeline, which surprised her, evident by the fear on her face. We have always been in tune with each other, and her fear only intensified my anxiety. I explained that I needed her to do this for me. And after a moment, she complied. He was crushing on day, equally crushing when I spoke to the other betrayed spouse, devastating when my wife admitted to the emotional affair, and it remained just as crushing now. The timeline covered the period from when my wife was hired until today. It outlined how her friendship with the other man began, the workplace culture, and how the other man presented himself as different. While he engaged in jokes with the guys, he didn't participate in the nonsense and maintained his department effectively. He started looking out for my wife and went out of his way to ensure her work was acknowledged. A friendship developed, and the other man began venting about his home life, with my wife becoming a supportive listener. He would inquire about her life, and it seemed like he was probing. She shared details about her mother's relapse. He became more outspoken in venting, and she regrets not speaking up earlier, but her perception of AP as one of the good ones clouded her judgment. At work, coworkers teased her for being AP's favorite, among other things. She didn't share this with me because at the time, I was dealing with issues involving my dad, and she felt her problems were insignificant in comparison, not wanting to burden me. Instead, she vented to AP, which kick-started the emotional affair, and now AP was privy to problems I knew nothing about. Learning this was painful because we had always maintained open communication. There was nothing we couldn't discuss. Regardless of my own concerns, she was my top priority, and I would have been there for her. We were a united team. AP began flirting at work and via text messages, and she reciprocated. He mentioned an upcoming promotion and expressed his desire to ensure she was considered because she was one of the top employees. After the promotion, he hugged her. marking their first physical contact, and humorously suggested she could thank him later. During a team outing for drinks, they separated to their own table, where he vented about OBS and his children. They proceeded to his hotel room under the pretext of listening to music and continuing the celebration of her promotion. He played music and commented on the view from his room. He pulled her close and engaged in some dancing, repeatedly expressing how attractive she was, and how he wouldn't be able to resist her if he were in my shoes. Eventually, he kissed her, causing her to freeze up. Her thoughts shut down, and her emotions were absent. AP began touching her, leading to closeness. She did not have a peak, and AP finished quickly. He remarked, "That was quite the celebration." Subsequently, he fell asleep. She discreetly left the bed and returned to her room. She immediately entered the shower and vigorously scrubbed her body, but she still felt tainted. She didn't sleep that night, spending it in tears as she thought about me. The following morning, there was only one meeting scheduled, but she didn't attend. AP called and expressed disappointment about missing another chance in the morning. She was providing minimal responses, and he inquired if something was wrong. However, she lied, claiming to be hungover. He offered to cover for her at the meeting and suggested the idea of extending their stay by another day. She was terrified of telling me what had occurred because she understood that cheating was an absolute deal-breaker for me. She devised a plan to end the affair by limiting her communication with AP to work-related matters. Upon reuniting with me, she returned home early, burdened by guilt, but acting as if nothing was amiss. On Saturday morning, she initiated closeness in an attempt to cleanse herself of her actions, but she only felt worse because she had been with AP without using protection. On Monday, AP took her aside, and she told him they should leave what happened in the past, acknowledging it was a mistake. However, AP contested this until another colleague approached. After the confrontation, she called her sister in a state of panic, and it was on the same day that my sister-in-law discovered the affair, just like I did. I believe individual counseling would be beneficial. I underwent IC for a year following my dad's affair. Additionally, I still intend to pursue the polygraph route. I'm aware that I need to have my WW take a pregnancy test. Even though she's on birth control, I would greatly appreciate any thoughts and advice on this entire situation. Update: on Friday night, I reached out to OBS via text to inquire if we could have a conversation. I sought her perspective and wanted to check on how she and her twins were coping. She called, mentioning that she had just put her children to bed, and explained how tough it had been on them. She emphasized that it was going to be a contentious divorce. AP was portraying himself as the victim and seemed arrogant. He hadn't offered an apology or taken any responsibility. He was residing in an extended stay accommodation, but she had changed the locks to prevent him from coming and going freely. I inquired about AP's background, specifically regarding any history of cheating or abusing his power. She understood the direction of my questioning. She mentioned suspicions of past infidelity throughout the years, believing that a woman often senses such things, but lacks concrete evidence that he couldn't deny. She thinks he became overly confident and careless with my WW. There was one incident 5 years ago at AP's previous job when a coworker reported him to HR for retaliating against her after she rejected his advances, but no consequences followed. She was labeled as a difficult employee who was frequently late and was dismissed as bitter after AP wrote her up. OBS admitted that she ignored the warning signs at that time because she was pregnant. There were no further allegations, and he had a strong reputation. It took me a moment to process this information. I also asked if AP had provided her with a timeline, to which she responded that she didn't care for one because she simply wants a divorce. She inquired about my decision regarding my WW and suggested her attorney services when I was ready, or for a consultation. I accepted the information and expressed my gratitude. We briefly discussed life after day before ending the call. My anger towards AP intensified. I do believe he targeted my WW, but she's still engaged in an emotional affair that grew, leaving me feeling deeply hurt, lost, and betrayed. Update: the next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do. I called the attorney OBS had recommended and set up a consultation. The attorney was understanding and professional, and he assured me that he would guide me through the process. As the day wore on, my anger grew. I decided to take action. I called the attorney and asked him to prepare the divorce papers. When they were ready, I felt a surge of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, all mixed together. I gathered all of my wife's belongings and stuffed them into trash bags. I placed them outside the house and sent her a text: "If you want your things, come get them now, or they'll be thrown away." Within an hour, she was at the door. Her face was pale and her eyes were red from crying. I handed her the divorce papers without saying a word. She looked at them, her hands shaking, and then back at me. "Is this what you really want?" she whispered. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was bubbling up inside me. "After everything you've done, after everything we've been through, you have the audacity to ask me that?" She broke down, falling to her knees and begging for another chance. She said she had no job. Her savings were low, and she had nowhere to go. She even tried to shift the blame onto her affair partner, saying he had pressured her into the affair, but I had heard enough. I said, "You need to take responsibility for your actions. Blaming someone else for your choices is cowardly," and closed the door behind her. The divorce proceedings were quick. My attorney had prepared everything meticulously. And within a few months, it was all over. I moved out of our shared home and started a new life. OBS and I continued to see each other, and our relationship grew stronger with each passing day. We both had our scars, but we were healing together.